geht an die deutschsprachigen Teilnehmer. Herzlich willkommen. In Kürze erwarten wir auch Papst Franziskus. Davor hören wir aber noch die Beiträge von Friedensnobelpreisträgerin Maria Ressa und des Schriftstellers Colum McCann. Moderieren wird der Journalist Mario Calabresi. Über die App 𝗦𝗘𝗕𝗀𝗧𝗏 können Sie die Live-Übersetzung des Dialogs auf Italienisch, Französisch, Englisch und Spanisch verfolgen. Zusätzlich zu den genannten Sprachen wird die Audienz mit dem Papst auch mit deutschem Kommentar auf Arabisch, Chinesisch und Portugiesisch sowie in Gebärdensprache live übertragen. Und sie wird Ihnen dann auch on demand zur Verfügung stehen. An dieser Stelle möchten wir auch auf die Botschaft hinweisen, die Papst Franziskus zum 59. Welttag der sozialen Kommunikationsmittel verfasst hat. Die finden Sie auf der offiziellen Seite von 𝗏𝗏𝗕𝗀𝗏 und auf Vatican News. Wir danken Ihnen für Ihre Teilnahme und hoffen, dass Sie sich gut austauschen können und positive Erfahrungen für Ihre berufliche und persönliche Entwicklung mitnehmen können. Ihnen alles ein erfolgreiches Kommunikationsjubiläum.
Queridos colegas periodistas, queridos comunicadores de todo el mundo, bienvenidos al Jubileo del Mundo de la Comunicación. Saludo especialmente a los participantes en lengua española. Pronto se nos unirá el Papa Francisco. El encuentro con el Santo Padre estará precedido por dos discursos de la Premio Nobel de la Paz Maria Ressa y del escritor Colum McCann, moderados por el periodista Mario Calabresi. A través de la app Vatican Vox podrán escuchar la traducción en directo del diálogo en italiano, francés, inglés y español. Además de los idiomas mencionados, la audiencia con el Papa también será transmitida en directo y on demand en alemán, árabe, chino, portugués y en lenguaje de señas. Les recordamos que tienen a su disposición el texto del mensaje del Papa Francisco para la 59ª Jornada Mundial de las Comunicaciones Sociales en el sitio web oficial de la Santa Sede, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, y en el sitio web de Vatican News. Agradeciéndoles la participación, les deseamos una experiencia de intercambio y crecimiento personal y profesional. Feliz Jubileo de la Comunicación.
Caros colegas jornalistas, caros comunicadores de todo o mundo, sejam bem-vindos ao Jubileu do Mundo da Comunicação. Saúdo especialmente os participantes de língua portuguesa. Em breve, teremos a presença do Papa Francisco e o encontro com o Santo Padre será precedido por dois discursos. Da ganhadora do Prêmio Nobel da Paz, Maria Ressa, e outro do escritor Colum McCann, moderados pelo jornalista Mario Calabresi. Através do aplicativo Vatican Vox, você pode ouvir a tradução do diálogo em italiano, francês, inglês e espanhol. Além dos idiomas mencionados, a audiência com o Papa será transmitida ao vivo e on demand em alemão, árabe, chinês, português e na língua dos sinais. Lembramos que vocês têm à disposição o texto da mensagem do Papa Francisco para a 59º Dia Mundial das Comunicações Sociais, no site oficial da Santa Sé, Vatican Va, e no site de Vatican News. Agradecendo a sua participação, desejamos que vivam uma experiência de partilha e crescimento profissional e pessoal. Bom jubileu da comunicação.
أيها الزملاء الصحفيون الأعزاء، أيها العاملون في مجال الإعلام، من جميع أنحاء العالم أهلا وسهلا بكم في يوبيل العالم الاتصالات. أوجه تحية خاصة للمشاركين الناطقين باللغة العربية. بعد قليل سينضم إلينا البابا فرانسيس. سيسبق لقاؤنا مع الأب الأقدس كلمتان تلقيهما الحائزة على جائزة نوبل للسلام ماريا ريسا والكاتب كولوم ماكين. وسينسق الجلسة الصحفي ماريو كالابريزي. من خلال تطبيق فاتيكان فوكس ستتمكنون من الاستماع إلى الترجمة الفورية للحوار باللغات الإيطالية والفرنسية والإنجليزية والإسبانية. بالإضافة إلى اللغات المذكورة سيكون اللقاء مع البابا متاحا بشكل مباشر بث حي، وعند الطلب أيضا باللغات الألمانية والعربية والصينية والبرتغالية ولغة الإشارة. نذكركم أن نص رسالة البابا فرانسيس بمناسبة اليوم العالمي 59 لوسائل التواصل الاجتماعي هو موجود بين أيديكم وعلى الموقع الرسمي للكرسي الرسولي وعلى موقع فاتيكان نيوز. نشكركم على مشاركتكم ونتمنى أن تعيشوا خبرة غنية بالمشاركة والنمو المهني والشخصي. نتمنى لكم يوبيلا مباركا لعالم الاتصالات. شكرا.
Drodzy koledzy dziennikarze, drodzy specjaliści do spraw mediów z całego świata, witamy Was na jubileuszu Świata Komunikacji. Szczególnie serdecznie pozdrawiamy uczestników mówiących w języku polskim. Już niedługo dołączy do nas papież Franciszek. Spotkanie z Ojcem Świętym poprzedzą 2 wystąpienia: laureatki pokojowej Nagrody Nobla Marii Resy oraz pisarza Columa McCanna, a moderatorem spotkania będzie dziennikarz Mario Calabresi. Za pośrednictwem aplikacji Vatican Vox mogą Państwo słuchać tłumaczenia na żywo w językach włoskim, francuskim, angielskim i hiszpańskim. Oprócz wymienionych języków, audiencja z Ojcem Świętym będzie transmitowana także w językach niemieckim, arabskim, chińskim, portugalskim oraz w języku migowym. Przypominamy, że mają Państwo do dyspozycji tekst orędzia papieża Franciszka na 59. Światowy Dzień Środków Społecznego Przekazu, dostępny na oficjalnej stronie Watykanu i w portalu Vatican News. Dziękując za Wasz udział, życzymy Wam doświadczenia wzajemnego dzielenia się oraz zawodowego i osobistego wzrastania. Dobrego przeżycia jubileuszu komunikacji.
Benvenuti e grazie di essere qui così tanti da così tanti paesi, 138 paesi. Non elenco tutti i paesi perché sono 138. Siamo così tanti che certamente non ci conosciamo tutti e possiamo approfittare allora di questi giorni e anche di adesso, mentre aspettiamo il Papa, per conoscerci meglio l'un l'altro. Servirà a costruire una rete di buon giornalismo e di buona comunicazione. Comincio quindi con il presentare me stesso. Sono Paolo Ruffini, sono un giornalista, sono uno di voi, sono il prefetto del Dicastero per la Comunicazione della Santa Sede. Ciò che ci riunisce qui è il Giubileo del mondo della comunicazione. È il desiderio di condividere una riflessione su come il nostro comunicare potrebbe essere migliore e su come questo potrebbe cambiare le nostre vite e le vite degli altri e su come questa speranza, per chi crede, tanti qui, la maggior parte, ma sono benvenuti anche quelli che non hanno ancora il dono della fede, come questa fede questa speranza sia radicata in qualcosa che ci trascende, che è la fede. Siamo qui per interrogarci su come e se è ancora possibile comunicare speranza in un mondo in crisi, in un mondo in guerra, su come sperare ancora nella comunicazione fra persone e non fra macchine, su come la tecnologia può e deve essere guidata, la libertà garantita, la conoscenza condivisa, su come sia difficile la ricerca della verità e facile il diffondersi delle falsità, su come sia importante il dialogo e quanto potente possa essere condividere le nostre storie, come le storie cambiano gli uni e gli altri, su come la comunicazione possa essere il collante o invece il veleno delle nostre comunità e dell'umanità tutta. Sono questioni che sfidano la nostra responsabilità personale e collettiva, che riguardano il modo di concepire anche, non solo il giornalismo, ma anche la tecnologia e anche l'economia. Riguardano anche la differenza tra la tutela e la conservazione dei dati e la trasformazione di ognuno di noi in una miniera di dati, cibo per algoritmi, come ha detto il Papa. Il nostro, il vostro ruolo è grande. Ciò che ci ha mosso nel venire qui a incontrare il Santo Padre in un'occasione come questa è, credo, la volontà di tornare alle radici del nostro mestiere, alla vocazione di comunicatori, di giornalisti, di narratori, alla radice della nostra speranza, di interrogarci tutti, credenti e non credenti, sul senso ultimo del nostro lavoro e di ricominciare da qui, di comprendere come e se possiamo costruire nella verità una speranza di futuro per tutti noi e raccontarla nella libertà delle culture, delle religioni, di ogni persona, nel dialogo con creatività anche nella tecnologia e anche nell'economia che riguarda il sistema della comunicazione. Fra non molto ascolteremo le parole di Papa Francesco. Nel frattempo avremo modo di ascoltare alcune riflessioni autorevoli e concrete di Maria Ressa, giornalista filippina naturalizzata statunitense, cofondatrice del sito di informazione Rappler, premio Nobel per la pace nel 2021, esempio coraggioso di giornalismo libero. Grazie di essere qui, Maria. Dello scrittore 𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗂𝗏, giornalista e scrittore irlandese, cittadino americano. I suoi romanzi hanno il potere di calarti dentro la storia nel mentre che si fa e di trovarci dentro meccanismi di speranza. 𝗂𝗏 ha anche fondato un'organizzazione, Narrative4, fondata sul potere trasformativo delle storie. Grazie 𝗂𝗏 di essere qui con noi oggi. E di Mario Calabresi, giornalista e scrittore anche lui, con una storia personale e professionale che proprio di questo parla, di come si può sperare, di come si può cambiare. Lascio a lui la parola per introdurre e moderare questo nostro primo incontro che precede quello con il Papa e prima ancora un concerto diretto al maestro 𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗏 con i nostri amici qui, che ringrazio di accompagnarci. Grazie.
Buongiorno. Buongiorno a tutte e tutti e benvenuti a questo incontro inaugurale del Giubileo del mondo della comunicazione. È un'occasione di riflessione per ragionare sui doveri e le opportunità della comunicazione e sulla necessità di lavorare per costruire speranza e fiducia. La domanda da cui partire credo che non possa che essere questa. Si può ancora comunicare la speranza? O potremmo anche dire, si può ancora comunicare con speranza? O quella dei nostri giorni è solo una narrazione disperata? Un'informazione in cui il male è protagonista assoluto, in cui la cronaca nera è il nostro pane quotidiano. Un'informazione in cui la rabbia e l'odio sono l'aria che respiriamo, in cui la propaganda costruisce ogni giorno un nemico, un colpevole, qualcuno a cui addossare la colpa delle nostre fatiche, dei nostri dolori, delle nostre paure. Un'informazione in cui ci abituiamo a coltivare la diffidenza, a vedere negli altri non degli esseri umani, non delle persone che ci somigliano e che hanno i nostri stessi bisogni, i nostri stessi desideri, i nostri stessi sogni e anche le nostre stesse paure, ma qualcuno da tenere lontano, qualcuno da considerare avversario se non nemico. Il male va raccontato. Nessuno qui immagina, e non lo faremo questa mattina, che il racconto della realtà debba essere colorato di rosa, che i fatti tragici, dolorosi e negativi vadano taciuti, che si debba immaginare una realtà alternativa, buona e rassicurante. Ma la narrazione del male non può essere l'unica, non può occupare tutto lo spazio, non può essere la sola chiave di lettura del mondo e non può essere il motore dell'informazione. Perché anche dentro il male esistono e si possono vedere elementi di bene. Ci sono persone e momenti che parlano una lingua diversa, segni di resistenza, di costruzione di situazioni alternative. Ma sembra che siamo diventati incapaci di coglierli. Eppure sono quelli i momenti di salvezza. Quegli esempi di bene sono gli appigli che ci aiutano a non cadere nel baratro, a non diventare preda della disperazione. Sono quelle le cose che ci possono parlare di speranza e che ci possono aiutare a ricostruire la fiducia negli altri e nell'umanità. Il mondo non è tutto nero, cupo e spaventoso. Guardiamoci intorno e se ci togliamo le solite lenti, noteremo un esercito di persone che ogni giorno costruisce cose buone, tiene relazioni, si prende cura, non si tira indietro, fa costantemente la sua parte. C'è chi cerca di risolvere le situazioni, chi interviene, chi si sacrifica, chi si occupa, chi cura, chi cerca la verità, chi si batte per la giustizia, chi resiste. Dobbiamo stare dalla loro parte, dobbiamo sposare il loro punto di vista, non quello della resa all'ineluttabilità del male. Ci deve essere salvezza, ci può essere salvezza. Le persone più importanti per cambiare i termini di questo discorso siete voi, sono qui in quest'Aula oggi. Ci vuole responsabilità, la responsabilità di non cavalcare il male nella convinzione che questo funzioni, che questo regali ascolto e attenzione. È una soluzione troppo facile e troppo semplice. Un'informazione che racconta ossessivamente solo il male distrugge la società. Ci sottrae la possibilità di vivere e costruire. Ci toglie fiducia e soffoca la speranza. Ma così facendo finiremo per smarrire il senso della nostra missione e ci ridurremo a essere seminatori di rabbia, di disperazione, di odio. Invece abbiamo la possibilità di essere seminatori di speranza, costruttori di senso, artefici di cambiamento. Il buon comunicatore, ce l'ha detto ieri Papa Francesco, fa sì che chi ascolta, legge o guarda possa essere partecipe, possa essere vicino, possa ritrovare la parte migliore di se stesso ed entrare con questi atteggiamenti nelle storie raccontate. Dobbiamo sapere che abbiamo la possibilità di scegliere da che parte stare e lo possiamo fare ogni giorno. Grazie. Ora vorrei presentarvi due ospiti veramente straordinari, di cui ascolteremo le riflessioni. Permettetemi di passare all'inglese per introdurli. Good morning and welcome. I would like to introduce this panel with these two outstanding guests, Maria Ressa and Colin McCann. Maria Ressa co-founded Rappler, the top digital-only news site that is leading the fight for press freedom in the Philippines. As Rappler's CEO, Maria has endured constant political harassment and arrests by the Duterte government. For her courage and journalistic integrity, Maria has received numerous awards. In October 2021, she was one of two journalists awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of her efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. In 2022, she was appointed by the United Nations Secretary General to the leadership panel of the Internet Governance Forum. She is a professor of practice at the Institute of Global Politics, Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, where she leads projects related to artificial intelligence and democracy. Her most recent book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, has been translated into more than 20 languages. Please, Maria, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, wow. So I'm going to pretend to be taller than I am by standing in front of you. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. My gosh, this is daunting here, by the way. It feels like a momentous time. This is a sacred space, and we're kicking off the Jubilee at this time of grace, of reflection, and of recommitment to the values that bind us together as a global community. This comes just in time as we are living through a profound transformation of our world. The last time something like what we are living through today happened, when new technology enabled the rise of fascism, was 80 years ago. That was also roughly around the last time a journalist was given the Nobel Peace Prize, except Carl von Ossietzky wasn't as lucky as I was. He languished in a Nazi prison and couldn't accept the award. For many years now, I've sounded the alarm. Just like in Hiroshima, an atom bomb exploded in our information ecosystem. In pursuit of power and money, technology enabled insidious manipulation at the cellular level of all of our democracies, of us, the people, the voters, micro-targeting fear, anger, and hate, seeding meta-narratives that destroyed trust. It created what the US Surgeon General called an epidemic of loneliness. It turned neighbor against neighbor, rewarding mob rule, rewarding the worst of who we are as people. Journalists were the first attacked. If you want power, tear down our credibility. This I know firsthand. I lived through it. My government targeted me with an average of 90 hate messages per hour. It functions like fertilizer, right? Hashtag Arrest Maria Ressa trended on social media 2 years before I was actually arrested. What seems impossible becomes possible with repetition. I was arrested and I first posted bail, and I can't forget it because it was my government's gift to me on Valentine's Day in 2019. In a little over a year, my government filed 10 arrest warrants against me. I began to do a workflow for posting bail. I didn't know what was going to happen, but Rappler and I just tried to do what was right. And now, 8 years, almost a decade later, those 10 criminal charges are down to 2. Still 2. In order to be here in front of you today, I have to ask the Philippine Supreme Court for approval to travel, so you lose your rights. The sad part, I always joke that the Philippines has moved from hell to purgatory, but the sad part is that I see what has happened to us in the Philippines happening to far more developed countries around the world. The vote in America I called the Philippinization of American politics. This Jubilee comes at a time when the world is upside down, when what's right is wrong and what's wrong is right. I remember an old cartoon when I was growing up and learning about making decisions of conscience. Every major religion has that. The hardest battle to fight is inside yourself. Islam calls it the jihad. That's the battle inside yourself. But you remember this cartoon if you're my age, right? On your right, you have the devil telling you, egging you on, saying, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. And then on your left, there's this angel reminding you of empathy, of other people, of the golden rule, do the right thing, be kind. Well, telling you not to be selfish, to share, to fight your worst instincts. Devil and angel. What social media did was to kick the angel off your shoulder, grow the devil, and give it a direct line into your nervous system. Big tech transformed social media from a tool of connection into a weapon of mass behavioral engineering. These platforms are not neutral technologies. They're sophisticated systems designed to exploit our deepest psychological vulnerabilities. They monetize our outrage and hate, amplify our divisions, and systematically erode our capacity for nuanced thinking, our capacity for empathy. In 2018, an MIT study showed that lies spread 6 times faster on social media, and that was before Elon Musk bought Twitter. You tell a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact. If you make people believe lies are facts, then you can control them. The business model of big tech pushes this. I'll say the same 3 sentences I've said over and over. Kind of feels like Cassandra and Sisyphus combined, but I'll say it again because we're in here. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these 3, we have no shared reality. We can't begin to solve any problem, let alone the existential ones like climate change. We can't have journalism, communications. We cannot have democracy. Surveillance capitalism, that business model, is built on a fundamental betrayal of human dignity, where data privacy has become a myth and AI and algorithms have cloned and manipulated us. 3 things. It created echo chambers that exacerbate existing biases, prioritized conflict over understanding, monetizing human attention, each of us, at the expense of social cohesion. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate design, an architecture for profit that brings in hundreds of billions of dollars a year to these companies. The hard part, what happens on social media doesn't stay on social media. There's only one of us, one you, living in both the physical world and the virtual world. Big tech hacked our biology, incited the worst of our emotions, fear, anger, and hate, because it changed the way we feel, it changes the way we look at the world, it changes the way we act, it changes the way we vote. Do we still have individual agency? We can see the trend. As of last year, VDEM said that 71% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. We are electing illiberal leaders democratically. After all, how can we have integrity of elections if we don't have integrity of facts? It's like we're standing on wood that's being eaten away by termites, and we just don't know when it will collapse. But something changed last year. In December, Romania became the first country around the world to void an election because of Russian manipulation of social media. They voided the election because of Kremlin interference. Now imagine if the UK in Brexit or the US in 2016 was brave enough to have taken those actions and prevented impunity. Electoral protests are happening all around the world, from Venezuela to Mozambique to Georgia, where large-scale protests began mid-April last year, but starting December, it was daily. And today is the 60th day when mass protests in Georgia are out in the streets. Journalists, activists beaten and jailed. The journalists carried my book in the protests, the title, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. Investigative journalist 𝗪𝗍𝗪𝗔 today starts her 14th day of a hunger strike from jail. She said, "Because I cannot stand by in silence." I've shown data for years now of how different countries around the world show that technology is the match that sets the world's dry kindlings on fire, right? So move fast, break things. That's what Mark Zuckerberg said, and big tech broke democracy. It's going to get worse. Early this year, a few weeks ago, he announced that Facebook is giving up on facts. It's canceling what it created, the fact-checking that's trying to, it's like putting a finger in a dam that's about to fall on you. But, dear Mark, this isn't a free speech issue. This is an issue of safety. Imagine if this hall had no safety measures and it was built of corroded materials and could fall on us at any time. How many more people will have to die? In 2018, the UN and Meta's own team independently went to Myanmar and found that Facebook enabled genocide. That was in 2018. Yet no one was held accountable. Online violence is real-world violence. This is something I've learned. I had to have closed-in security. We increased security in Rappler, Little Rappler, 6 times in less than a few months. From Myanmar to Gaza, to Ukraine, to Sudan, online violence feeds into real-world violence, and they all feed into each other. Add Zimbabwe, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, the other forgotten battlegrounds around the world. These wars are fought not just with missiles and tanks, but with algorithms, disinformation, and the systematic destruction of truth and our communities of trust. Information warfare, geopolitical power play is exploiting these platforms' design. Remember, the goal is not to make you believe one thing. The goal is make you doubt everything so you cannot act. Globally, 2 main fracture lines of society that is pounded open, regardless of country or culture. That's gender and race. And the attacks are often fueled by religion. Sexism that turns into misogyny, and racism that finds its way into constitutions like Hungary, where it's called white replacement theory. You hear it in the news as immigration or inflation, but if you dig deeper, you will see gender and race. A few years ago, we in Rappler decided that the empty promises of big tech, that we've kind of had enough, and so we began building a public tech stack for the virtual world, where real people can have real conversations without being manipulated for power and money. We rolled out a Matrix protocol chat app a little more than a year ago. It is open source, secure, decentralized. It is used by countries that value data privacy. France, Germany, their websites are on the Matrix protocol. Our vision is a federation of news organizations all around the world. It is the only way we will survive this moment. My colleague, 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 will tell you more about it. I'm going to post the link for you to try it on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky. I'm sorry to send you there, but please come back to the Matrix afterwards. Because we are at the Vatican, I want to point out 3 things. First, technology rewards rewards lies. Think about that. The first time I met Pope Francis, I said, Pope Francis, it's against the 10 Commandments. 2, the men who control this transformative technology wield godlike power, but they're far from God. They're only men whose arrogance, the lack of wisdom, and a lack of humility is taking the world down a dark path. Increasingly, by their own words and definitions, their unchecked and unaccountable power is resembling a cult. Which is why religion, faith, the Catholic Church, becomes more important today. In How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I write about how a simple idea, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, how that has guided me throughout my life. It helped define courage for me in a world that is increasingly shaped by lies. The courage to speak when silence is safer. The courage to build bridges when walls seem easier. And the courage to stand for truth even when it feels like the entire world is against you. I like the South African word, Ubuntu. I am because we are. It's an antidote to many of our problems today. It's a universal truth that our faith communities embody. The pain of one is the pain of all. When big tech rewards the worst of who we are, Ubuntu teaches us that our fates are interconnected, that the fight for truth, justice, and peace is not someone else's battle, it is ours. Every single person in this hall. So what can you do? Thank you for waking up this morning. Now, I have 4 suggestions for you. 1, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Build and strengthen trust now to close the fractured lines of society that information operations will try to pound open, pitting one of us, each of us, against the other. 2, like Pope Francis, speak truth with moral clarity. Because silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Whether it's systemic racism, economic inequality, or the erosion of democratic norms, people of faith must reclaim, you must reclaim our prophetic voice. Demand transparency and accountability from those who control our public information ecosystems, from governments to big tech to media. 3, protect the most vulnerable. Support journalists, human rights defenders, and activists who risk their lives. Remember the Martin Niemöller quote from Germany? Here's our Philippine version, which was published by our largest newspaper after my first arrest. Here's the quote. First, they came for the journalists. We don't know what happened next. Your networks can be powerful shields for marginalized communities. Support immigrants, religious minorities, the LGBTQ+, and others who face discrimination. Our collective vigilance can prevent the normalization of hate. And 4, please, every one of us, recognize your power. Building peace is not reserved for heroes. It's the collective work of people who refuse to accept and live lies. Rappler could not have survived without the help of our community, always reminding me of the goodness of human nature. You are powerful and can be part of this tidal wave of change for the good. And that is powered by love. Sometimes that's hard to say as a journalist. So let me repeat them again. 4, collaborate, speak truth with moral clarity, protect the most vulnerable, and recognize your power. Even at the worst of times, hope is not passive. It is active, relentless, and strategic. Our faith traditions carry centuries of resilience. We need to share those stories of transformation. And finally, I'll leave you with this. There's this T.S. Eliot quote I love about the present moment of the past, this moment we live in. I always tell Rapplers, you know, this moment, we want to do the right thing because a decade from now, when we look back, we want to say we did everything we could. T.S. Eliot, the present moment of the past, it's the idea that the latest novel you read is affected by the fact that you read Shakespeare when you were really young, or the Bible, but that your understanding and appreciation of the Bible, of Shakespeare, will be affected by the latest novel that you read. In this present moment of our shared past, we have a choice, and it will create our future as much as change how we look at our past. We can allow the fracture lines of our society to break open, or we can work to heal these growing divides. Because this is it. This time matters. What you choose to do matters. There's so many of us in this room. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the dicastery for bringing us together, to the Vatican, to the Pope. Imagine if we all worked together. We just might stem the tide, stop the dam from falling, and heal our world. Thank you.
I think we have to stand up and to stand up. Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the state of journalism and communication with us. It's so important to remember that without facts, you can have truth. Without truth, you can have trust. Without these three, we can't have journalism. We cannot have democracy. Thanks a lot. Column. Born in Ireland, Colum McCann is the best-selling author of 14 books, including A Paragon and Let the Great World Spin. He is the winner of the US National Book Award and several other major international prizes, as well as an Oscar nomination. His work has been published in over 40 languages. He is the co-founder of the global organization Narrative4, which equips young people to harness the power of storytelling to drive change within their communities. And this experience, as you will hear in his speech, is fundamental in his message of hope. Thank you. Please, Colum.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Maria, for that extraordinary words of wisdom and advice and courage. a pilgrimage of repair. So, almost 100 years ago now, a series of letters went back and forth between Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud. Einstein, the scientist, the father of relativity, was interested in the theory of everything. And Freud, known as the father of psychoanalysis, was interested, as you know, in exploring the brain and the body. Together, Einstein and Freud were the bellwether minds of their times. But a curtain of darkness had descended around the world. Europe had emerged from one devastating war, and although these two eminent scientists didn't know it for certain, the world was on the cusp of another disaster. Einstein wanted to explore humanity's, quote, lust for hatred, and so he wrote to Freud to ask him if he thought it might be possible to guide the psychological development of man so that it can become resistant to the psychoses of hate and destruction, thereby delivering civilization from the menace of war. A big, brave question. How might we deliver civilization from the rubble of war, and perhaps even in the process cultivate an idea of world peace? Now, when Freud replied, he told Einstein, sadly, that all his life he had been telling people truths that were difficult to swallow. In his opinion, there was very little likelihood of humankind being able to counteract the vast evils of war. Humanity, he said, has always had an active instinct for hatred and destruction, and it would not, in his opinion, ever be possible to eradicate it. Still, there was a crack of light. Ending war might be impossible in the absolute, but standing up against it and fighting for peace and for justice was not impossible. Anything, Freud said, anything that creates emotional ties between human beings must inevitably counteract war. What should be sought by humanity, said Freud, was a community of feeling and a mythology of the instincts. A community of feeling, a mythology of the instincts, what we might call today a story, or what we might also call a parable. So, we live right now in the most and least human of times. On the one hand, we have made spectacular leaps forward in science, in medicine, in art, and in technology. We have instant access to one another. We can recognize the texture of each other's lives from great distances. Our phones work, most of the time. Our switches work. Our taps work, our satellites work, our medicines work. The machines of our lives blink on and off constantly. Yet on the other hand, and at the exact same time, we are living through the aforementioned epidemic of loneliness and isolation. So often we refuse to listen to one another. Our curtains get drawn across. Our windows get closed. We create divides between one another. We refuse to cross the street to help. We remain rooted in our own narrow canals of certainty. We tumble into the anonymity of our machines. And the tiny spaces that exist between one another grow wider and wider with every tick of the clock. The tension stretches the endpoints. It stretches and it stretches and it stretches until the snap occurs and the times break, like Maria said. Almost a whole century on from Einstein and from Freud, we are still asking ourselves the same questions. How do we avoid the wars that threaten to annihilate us? How do we counteract the effects of climate change? How do we ease the great geographic pressure of migration? How can we deal with issues of identity and issues of belonging? How can we recognize one another across those deepening divides? And how can we use our undoubted brilliance, our technology, our medicine, our artificial intelligence, and our faith to communicate with one another? If the world is built of molecules and atoms, it is also built of stories. The least distance between us is not a millimeter or even a picometer. It is a story. This is how we find one another. Our lives touch. Our ideas touch. We spin off one another. We create new energy. The quarks of our experience make new building blocks. We cast a wide net of understanding. The world becomes more deeply patterned. So our stories matter. They can change the course of history. They can rescue us. Stories are the glue that hold us together because we are nothing, absolutely nothing, if we cannot communicate with one another. This is even more applicable when we get a chance to understand the stories of those who are seemingly different and seemingly distant to us. We stop, we listen to others, and we become bigger than ourselves. The world is, in fact, made of the stories of others, even those that we don't know, and maybe in particular, those that we don't know or don't yet know. So, who can deny the humanity of the person when you have just heard his or her or their story? Who can slam a missile into a marketplace when you know the story of the woman who owns the fruit stand? Who can allow their politicians to refuse an emergency food truck into a war zone when you have heard the story of the child wasting away in the darkness? And who is going to be able to close the border gate on the wheelchair-bound boy who's traveling for life-saving treatment? Who? Let us ask ourselves that question this morning. Who? Who? And let's just pause a moment, because perhaps the brutal and unfortunate truth is that in today's world, increasing numbers of us can. The crux of our contemporary dilemma is not so much silence as it is the act of silencing. When we refuse to listen to the stories of others, or more poignantly, when we refuse to let others tell their stories at all, or even more poignantly still, when we annihilate the stories of others, the world becomes a spectacle of narrowness. So our refusal to step beyond ourselves, or at least those who don't look like us, or sound like us, or vote like us, is at the core of our possible doom. This dangerous tightening has the capability of shutting us down entirely. Like an artery that has become blocked, we cut off our lifeblood, the heart surrenders. We must retreat into the jail of self. We cannot love our neighbor anymore because we have no neighbor but ourselves. And when we have no neighbor but ourselves, we have no meaning beyond the solipsistic gaze. So who are we if we are only ourselves? We become the very emptiness that we fear, the same emptiness that Maria just talked about. We allow great crimes to occur, the destruction of our environment, the annihilation of our neighbors, the proliferation of poverty to occur. We wire ourselves for meaninglessness. So if we, as a government or a church or a community, can deny another person their story, we can deny their very existence. This is a powerful and insidious weapon. It can sow fear, it can isolate, it can dehumanize. Fear sells, ignorance sells. Hatred, because of fear and ignorance, takes a foothold. And yes, lies abound, rumors abound, gossip abounds. A story denied is not made equal by a lie being told. This is where the imbalance of power comes in. Power is very well aware that you own and indeed limit the story of others. If you do so, if you limit their stories, you own everything, even the person themselves. The true story of our neighbors, nuanced and contradictory and intensely human, gets lost. The truth is put in handcuffs and then imprisoned. Without a story, the proximity and even the very existence of others is annihilated. It happens publicly in many places, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, but it also happens closer to home, deep within our own hearts too. So the nullification of the stories of our supposed enemies, who are really just our neighbors, is one of the world's most insidious weapons. Our lack of access to the nuanced and meaningful stories of other people, along with the refusal to create places where we can listen, is one of the greatest dangers that we face today. So, if we live in broken times, what is the new theme? Well, the new theme must be repair. And how do we repair what is obviously broken? Einstein's opinion was that some healing would come about in the form of world government. Out of this, organizations like the United Nations were born. His idea was that world leaders would be able to guide us towards some sort of coherence. But beautiful as it was, it has not worked in the way we would have wanted. So much good has come from these global bodies, but we still find ourselves at the deepening coalface of doom. The approach in decades gone by has been to treat power from the top down. Our leaders pressed their ideas upon us from above. Decisions were made at the highest level and filtered down through a hierarchical structure. At the time, and still today, it was usually assumed that our leaders, and our technology leaders as well, had our best interest in mind. But we live now in an age that recognizes the principle of emergence. The theory of emergence states that a multitude of any number of tiny things, neurons, bacteria, ants, people, can exhibit properties way beyond the capability of one individual. Flocking birds, for example, can display emergent qualities, wheeling across the sky in seamless formations. Honeybees become so much more startling when they work in unison. Groups of people like us can possess intelligence, or indeed our own stupidity, far greater than the sum of its parts. So storytelling too can exhibit the possibility of emergence in this fractious day and age. And sharing our stories alongside listening to the stories of others, might be one of the things that can save us. So, storytelling and story listening is a call to action. It is indeed a form of prayer. At Narrative 4, the global nonprofit organization which empowers young people to create change through storytelling and story listening, we have found a simple formula to initiate change. You tell my story, I tell yours. In the first person, face to face. Not a didactic story, but a personal story. Not something designed to win an argument, but something that stirs your heart, stirs your soul. A parable, if you will. Something that accesses the truth without being declarative. Something that is humble, something that is kind, something that bows its head. Something, or rather someone, who listens. We have run the Narrative 4 program in Ireland, Mexico, United States, Nigeria, South Africa, Italy, and dozens of other countries around the world. So, this change, it begins in our classrooms, because what happens in our classrooms happens for the rest of our lives, and then it moves from the classrooms outward, across the city, across the country, across oceans, building a latticework of connection. Young people soon realize that personal storytelling, in personal storytelling, we are so much more alike than we are different. In doing this, we dwell not only in somebody else's story, but we hear our own being told back to us. And in the process, this simple but astounding process, we recognize one another's common humanity. In his message for the 54th World Communications Day, Pope Francis wrote, "Amid the cacophony of voices and messages that surround us, we need a human story that can speak of ourselves and of the beauty around us. A narrative that can regard our world and its happenings with a tender gaze. A narrative that can tell us that we are part of a living and interconnected tapestry. A narrative that can reveal the interweaving of the threads which connect us to one another." Look around. Just for a moment, look around right now and feel how we can, with a tender gaze, be connected to one another. The act of listening generously and the act of telling generously bolsters our very notions of peace, equality, democracy, and understanding. Stories can lead to action, which can lead to change. Rather than being applied from the top down, it is gathered from underneath. It comes from you. Even if we disagree with one another, even if we live across a border from one another, even if we have vastly different histories, even, in fact, if we dislike one another. I have been blessed to have had the chance to write about two fathers, one Israeli, one Palestinian, Rami Elhanan and Bassam Aramin. Despite losing their daughters in separate incidents in the conflict, they have become good friends. And even more startling, they have maintained their friendship. They travel the world together, telling and sharing their stories. Their philosophy is simple and yet profound. What they say is this: we don't have to love one another. In fact, we don't even have to like one another, though we hope that we could. But we pray we must understand one another. And so, these men continue to travel, and they continue to tell their stories, and they have become, like you, pilgrims of hope. So this is the task that belongs to all of us, scholars, writers, mechanics, clerics, chefs, housekeepers. But in particular, it belongs to our teachers and our journalists, who are uniquely positioned to guide this principle of emergence. Among the pilgrims of hope that we salute here today, the teachers and the journalists and the communicators are the ones who guide us, uniquely positioned to help tell the stories of other people. They understand that for a story to be told, it must be properly listened to. These stories and the understanding of others can go outside the classroom, outside the newsroom, outside this hall, across the street, across the city, across the country, across the oceans from continent to continent. And this then becomes our pilgrimage of repair, a community of feeling, a mythology of the instincts. As pilgrims, we bow our heads on the rocky road and we move on, carrying our humanity, but most importantly, the humanity of others from one place to the next. Now, if all of this has the sound of a clarion call, then so be it. It is a clarion call. We live in very dangerous times. We cannot afford to ignore the stories of others. Will storytelling and story listening save the world? Possibly, possibly not. But it certainly will, at the very least, allow a ray of light and understanding. And where there's one ray of light, we all know, there is the possibility of many more, collaborating, working together until at least a portion of this darkness is pierced. So simply, at first, being interested in one another is a triumph. I ask you again just to turn around a moment and look at one another. Being interested in one another and the person that you don't know is a triumph. Imagine how many triumphs can come about when we learn to understand and like, or maybe even love one another. Ordinary people with our ordinary stories and our ability to connect. The shortest distance between being an enemy or a neighbor is a story. Now, the cynics will say that we are wrong. They will say that we're naive and that we're sentimental. But on the contrary, perhaps it is naive and sentimental to refuse hope. Cynics live in the clouds of their own understanding. They refuse to take a pilgrimage to elsewhere. They stay where they are, they close the curtains, they shut down the GPS on their own imaginations. Does this mean that we should isolate the cynics and pass them along the way? No, of course not. On the contrary, we must embrace them with hope, listen to them, bow our heads, share our stories, listen to others, find common ground, and then move on in the hope that we have left some healing behind. And finally, in this exponential age, as the brokenness multiplies, the fundamental essence of repair is that we need to know one another. To know one another, we need to listen and we need to communicate. After listening, we need to understand, and then respectfully and joyfully and courageously, we can begin to initiate change. May the Lord bless and save you all. 𝗓𝗡𝗅𝗧𝗏. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your touching speech. Really, thank you so much. Okay, now we have the privilege of a special concert. Let me speak in Italian to introduce Maestro 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. I introduce 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, then we have to move, I think. È con grande piacere che vi presentiamo un breve concerto del maestro 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, uno dei più grandi interpreti della musica classica, accompagnato dalla sua orchestra. Questo evento è promosso dalla Fondazione 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, impegnata nella diffusione della musica classica, nel sostegno ai giovani talenti e nella valorizzazione del patrimonio culturale italiano. Il programma di oggi prevede un concerto in La minore di Johann Sebastian Bach e Oblivion di Astor Piazzolla. Vi invito a dare un caloroso benvenuto al maestro 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 e alla sua orchestra. Grazie.
Ciao.